I'm the program coordinator at MyDough. I will be running and facilitating the workshop for today. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us for today for the Global Entrepreneurship workshop. And if you missed yesterday's workshop, can you please kindly catch up on the Learning app under the Learning Zone? Today, our guest is none other than Bernard Cerruti. Just a brief background information on Bernard. He's the business coach and he's also a head coach at MyDough, a graduate from um, Combat Combatant and Startup School. I'm sorry. He is an industry engineer with years of experience in financial services with expertise in business engineering. He's the founder and chief commercial officer of Quantum Analytics, a tech company that provides services as an inventory control solutions provider. If there's anything that I'm leaving behind, Bernard, you are more than welcome to add on. Just a few ground rules before I hand over to Bernard. Can everyone please keep their mics on mute? And if you have any questions, may you kindly type them in the chat box or raise your hand. I will have Kulu on the call who will be facilitating that. And we will also have a Q&A session after the presentation. Bernard, you can take over.
Hi, Mutimero. I think, and also hi to everyone on the call. I think thanks for making the time. I think you've covered it decently well. I think the profiles evolve over time. I thought let me just switch on my camera for a little bit. For those that don't know me, I know a lot of people on the call, part of the ecosystem. And I think speaking today, it's more to kind of speak to the fact that, look, I appreciate these engagement, but at this time of the year, I'm always quite cautious because we're entering a phase where it's 2 months generally from a B2B perspective of very little revenue, if any, right? Unless you're in the entertainment space, unless you are kind of going to be in the retail spaces, November is the time where you need to be closing out, getting your sales, making sure you're getting paid before mid-December. So I think if you're heeding my call, make sure your customers are paying it before we close out. And I think today, really just capturing from an essence point of view is I like to simplify topics. So there's the coach in me. But it's then saying, what do we talk about when you talk about business resilience, right? And it's really equipping your business to handle challenging landscapes. And you'll also let me know if you prefer the camera on or off. I'm easy either way. But it's preparing your business to kind of navigate through challenging landscapes. And, for you is, there are environments that might suffocate your business or even you yourself suffocating your business. But the reality now here, the way I view it is how do you stack the tips we share is like, how do you stack the odds into your favor? There's a quote from the movie The Banker that I love quite a bit. It's an interaction between Samuel L. Jackson and I think the main character starting this bank. And it's being started in, the South, I think in the 19, whatever, deep Jim Crow eras. And, the guy was still Samuel L. Jackson playing the role. He's kind of then saying, how do you still stay excited about this? And he says, even a rigged game is worth playing, Bernard. And I think, besides the fact that it mentioned my name in there, but it's just the dynamics of, any kind of environment, starting a business, you're going to encounter headwinds. How do you prep your business to be able to navigate that? How do you stack the odds into your favor? And hopefully today we'll be able to cover some of those. Some you'll be able to, apply readily. Some you'll probably invest in over the next period. But I'm hoping that we can leave this conversation at least with some kind of tool set that can help us prep for 2025. and navigate. So I think in terms of flow of discussion, I think I'd like it to be a discussion. Obviously, there'll be time for Q&A, but a heads up, I haven't timed this. So if it's short, great. If it's long, you'll just have to bear with me. In terms of the intro, I'd just like to give you a perspective on how you view your business. And it's an interest one, I think for me, that can help how you view it so that it's not a case of you are overbearing on your businesses. How do you sort of build it in such a way that it can navigate the world with less and less of your input in there? And the next steps is really speaking to the building blocks, how to start to stack, understanding what business resilience means, adapting. So use cases of what adapting your business model to change, being able to swift in that space, moving with the currents. What does that speak to? This one is always, a major one in the entrepreneurial space. The financial buffers. How do you make sure you can survive late payment, non-payment? How do you make sure you have capital to pay your employees month to month, for 12 months at a time? If you're bringing someone on board, how do you make sure you're able to pay them for at least, or promise them, security of employment and payment for at least 12 to 24 months? And these are the kind of things you can put there. Agility in operations. I think it's speaking to the middle ground, right? And I think as SMMEs, we tend to move readily from, I've got no employees and then I've got 15. And, that can be very difficult, because if circumstances change from a revenue point of view, how do you adapt? What processes do you have in place? And I think another big one here is developing strong digital presence. How do your customers find you? How do you engage with them? It's primary reason for having one. And then this probably understated, a resilient team culture is how do you have a group of people committed to the same thing? And then lastly, I think, in the context of probably South Africa, where customer service is not necessarily the best, right? Is how do you position your business as one that is able to offer customers something that they're willing to pay for year after year, month after month, day after day, if that's your business model. And the last one, I guess, is giving you a bit of context. I think it's probably a bonus slide, so to speak, but also practically speaking to what does having a resilient business or viable business mean? And this always comes down to revenue in my book. I think before we go even deeper, just people coming in, make sure you mute your mics so it's not distracting for others on the call. From an intro perspective, I'd like to encourage you to kind of look at your business as, this is your child, right? It's your child, from inception, from the early days, heavily reliant on you. You're involved in every part of this thing. You're trying to keep it alive. You're trying to make sure it's nourished. You're trying to give it the tools it needs so it can face the world and grow, right? But then as it's evolving, you are hoping that there's then an exit point where this business is ready to kind of navigate and face the world and grow and develop, get married, enter the workforce, get promotions, start businesses. And that's year-on-year growth, right? Incremental, where the influence you have on it is purely then advisory at that stage, strategic, the odd coming in to fix a few things, where challenges do happen. Because I think as SMMEs, you want to not have a situation where you are actively involved in your business at every part of the business from start till 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Is how do you build those sort of key building blocks so that it can navigate? There's teams in place, there's procedures in place, there's a legal framework in place, there are processes that help you develop better relationships with your customers, help you identify trends in the market so that you can adapt. And I think that's, for me, the perspective I'd like to leave you with when you engage the material for today, is to then say, view this as your child. At some point, I know we don't talk about exit strategies, but it's really slowly exiting lower order activities in your business so that you're equipping it more from a strategic point of view. As you become an expensive resource in your business, you are then applying more strategic insight into the business from a growth perspective. And that is essentially what we're trying to achieve, is how do we get your business ready to kind of face any kind of challenging landscape. And just to unpack this a little bit more, I mean, you have 3 different stages, I guess, summarized. You're looking at inception, again, it's where it's heavily reliant on you. Fledgling business, you might have a few other people that are there, a few things running, but you are heavily involved in most parts of the business. You want to then get to a point where it's established business, right? This is now where you're probably a director, you've been called upon for strategic value, and the business is running. Right? And in simple terms, there's a bit of an awkward conversation to be having, but in the early stages, high risk of failure. And for reasons that you would look at is a business being heavily dependent on you means if anything happens to you, if you are sick, potential loss of revenue, potential loss of customers. If you are sick, nothing is sort of functioning. Or if you unfortunately something happens to you and you can't work or you pass on, what happens to that business, right? Immediate risks that are there. And even then, for example, it doesn't have brand equity. People are not really sort of clamoring to come and work with you. You have to work actively at it. Bringing in people is high risk. You don't have too much capital to pay them. So early days is like really
My boo, how are
vulnerable. Very, very
you? Good,
vulnerable
thanks.
days.
Where are you? Are you in Portugal? Or Spain?
Can we
Where were you
please
going?
mute? There's a person there who hasn't muted their mic.
I'm sorry about that. I've muted her.
Okay, perfect. And then you want to move to a point where, as you put in the building blocks, is reducing vulnerability and improved resilience, right? The ability then to navigate very difficult circumstances. So what does this then look like in practical situations? You look at, for example, the recent situations we've come through. COVID, some businesses survived dependent on their ability to move to digital. Coming in from a tech background, I was grateful for it because it made certain opportunities, certain people more accessible because I didn't need to meet them in person to be able to do a deal or to be able to have a meeting. So how quickly were you able to adapt to that? The middle one, you might think, there's certain mistakes as SMMEs and shouldn't be like deter you from moving. If the first sort of red pin is like the first sort of foundations you put in that weren't too super stable, they worked at a point in time. It's the advice for me is to say you can always correct it. I mean, we have lawyers coming on, I think tomorrow, Thursday. Lawyers are always there to kind of help you restructure. There's business practitioners that can help you sort of change the trajectory of your business. Nothing is cast in stone, but you then need to be looking at, things that you put in place. Are they putting you at risk in future? What building blocks can you put that can help you scale the business? Always be looking at it from that point of view. And if you aren't able to do that, it means you're too in the business, right? And how do you start to get out of that? And the last one, I used an image here of like your F1 racing. It's an inherently risky business, but it's also a note to kind of then say we shouldn't be avoiding going into high risk engagements because it's inherently risky. The key then is how do you build the right kind of sets, the right teams that changing the tires, the strategy of when you should use which tire for which environment, the simulations that people prep before you get to a race, knowing this. And these are the kind of things for me is like, how do you then build these things, training your staff so that when they engage customers in certain scenarios, they're well equipped to do so, building job profiles that are well aligned to building on the company objective, right? And these are then things you can build in your business, and it's stacking the odds in your favor to build a business that can weather a lot of storms. So typical things you want to look out for in terms of business risk. I know reputational in the recent period, we looked at what has happened with the likes of Drip. You look at various scandals where the CEOs are implicated, and I think we tend to look at that as quite far from us as SMMEs. But I think reputational risk is try not delivering to a customer, particularly a corporate, and you realize how small the B2B world is. Right? Struggle then to get other work. People know each other, people have gone to school, and you then want to make sure that from the get-go you're building the right kind of brand for your business and protecting it at all costs. Operationally, I think I touched on it, is if you're not in your business, what's happening with it, right? Do you have processes that drive consistency in output? And those are kind of financial. Speaking to it again, can you deliver? Do you have the capital? So if a big project came to you, do you have access to capital? Do you have means? Strategic risk, so the failure fundamentally is where your business is positioned, is fundamentally wiped out. And I'll unpack this a little bit more. Compliance and regulatory, pretty much simply put, is that the compliance body can come up and basically close your business or make it very difficult to operate. Like you think DMR, the minerals for mining space. And for some of us, that creates opportunities, right? If you're then offering solutions to the mining space, if it's linked to compliance, like SARS or even like to SARS, for accountants, that creates opportunities for work when there's a body that's forcing people to comply with a certain thing. Because people are not willing to really pay unless someone is sitting there with something that says, if you don't pay, you're going to lose your ability to operate. Then you look at other aspects. You look at competitive, how you're outwitting the people around you. But it's also important to know how big is your market, because you can worry about competitors when the market is actually fundamentally big enough for you guys to occupy different parts of that market. Computer security, I think, is a really big one in this era. That recently one of my, beneficiaries sort of be hacked, and they were forced to kind of engage customers on WhatsApp, right? And if that isn't an impulse to sort of install the right kind of frameworks to protect your business, right? You then need to think twice. It's like you're exposed as you grow. How do you build in those protections? We've got in the ecosystem ICT companies that can help you fortify that tech framework so that you're not operating in unfamiliar waters. Environmental, political, health and safety. And I think I just want to come back to strategic, because strategic can be such a big one in the sense you think of a focus on the transport sector, you think of meter taxis, right? The failure to adapt to, as governments invest in, for example, better public transport, where do you fit in that scheme? And then you try and hold on to an environment where things have already moved. You've got Ubers, you've got Bolts, and yes, they have their inherent issues, but that sort of segment then is lagging behind significantly. In the same transport space, you look at strategic risk, you look at taxis that are normal taxis that not investing in have to pay technologies, right? Might sound like a rational thing. I mean, having been someone growing up in taxis, the trauma of being the person who's got the 100 rand first thing in the morning that needs to be broken up, creating a mess in terms of change. But I'm seeing it now that there's a move, not just in like Caltrain buses, but you look at your Patco buses have enabled that payment mechanism, which means it's more inclusive, right? Which means more customers. And I think failure to adapt in that way is almost a surefire way to inhibit the growth of your business. So I think we've probably got various businesses on the call here, but it's important to kind of think about in that lens, what are the trends that are shaping my business and how can I meaningfully adapt to them? I think it's less so sort of saying don't jump to AI when you don't even have like processes in place, for example, or start to like equip you to better security on your software licenses. There are basic steps you can take. It's not taking the extreme view, but incrementally, how can you adapt? And then linked to this, speaking of adapting, I want to give sort of practical examples to say, how have businesses, I think, started at a certain point and evolved? And it fundamentally comes from understanding, one, your customer, understanding as well the landscape, and adapting accordingly. The first example is actually one of my favorite businesses at the moment. Um, I wouldn't probably advise buying shares at the moment because it's rallying quite high, but at some point look into it, right? It's a business that started, as a typical dealership like any other that you would find. And it's grown and scaled to then be the big brother of dealerships, right? They essentially supply the bulk of vehicles that you end up consuming, whether you're consuming it at a BMW or Fanny's thingy at some point in time. And they've built a tech platform as well linked to this that is able to kind of, for your Polos, for example, the most sort of bought vehicles in SA, they've got a higher margin because they're in higher demand. They've got a pricing mechanism to say, we price these higher, we know we're going to get buyers. The ones that have got, less of a demand are priced lower so that they don't sit. So the whole view is it's a turnaround time. So the key metric in this business is days per bay. What is it? It's the amount of time the car spends on a bay. I think it's probably like 11 days or something like that. I need to track the latest. But that's the turnaround time of vehicles from they come in till they leave. And if you look at the extent of their marketing, you might think, this business is probably geared for me as an average consumer. But it's essentially a B2B business. 70 to 75% of their revenue is coming from other dealerships, from people who manage fleets, because you've now giving them ready access to vehicles that they need, and increasing revenue for the ecosystem. Right? And it's important to note that this started as a normal dealership in Pretoria North. You look at the N6060. I'm a fan of Checkers in that they're one particular retail chain that's probably dominating the space now, but it comes from the space of understanding the environment, but also understanding your customer. Broadly, you look at Checkers in a time when the likes of Woolworths were increasing prices because volumes had gone down and there was affordability issues. They then looked through supply chain efficiencies to lock in prices for the end consumer. And when you then look at I'd say it's post-COVID, but post-2020, post-2021, increased in trust for digital, you launched then your 6060s. First mover advantage means they learn, they make the mistakes first, and they dominate. Right? And to this day, their competitors are bleeding because, yes, they've got the subsequent offerings, but first mover advantage means you are able then to refine and perfect this kind of space. And then lastly, you look at the likes of Microsoft, which is at this point in time a behemoth, something that started just as operating system, but they've embedded themselves in every part of our lives. And the key move for them from moving to the point of I'm installing this thing on my individual PC to I'm able to access this from a cloud point of view, the agility in their business to be able to add new services. I see a lot of people are using note takers on the call, AI note takers. Things only a matter of time before Microsoft has its own. So it's easy to kind of adopt those. You think of, the chat GPTs, you have your equivalent co-pilot. So as a business, it's built itself in such a way that it can adapt almost to any environment, which, the monopoly side of things you can complain about, but it's just built on just solid foundation. And they're constantly innovating to see where the threat's coming from and how do we bring them into our business to reduce that risk and unlock more revenue. And coming to one that is probably close to all of your minds, probably coming into this part of the year, but is how do you create the financial strengths in your business? How do you lock that in? And quite simply, it's like you build these in before you need them. That's my take in the space, because when you do need them, there's no one that's really willing to help you out. There's a saying that the banks offer you an umbrella when it's sunny, but take it away when it's raining, right? And as you know, in the SMME landscape, I mean, you're trying to save for a rainy day, it starts to rain that same night. So it's fundamentally that challenge of how do we then start to create these things early on. And the one thing I'll encourage in first point of call is, if you don't know who your relationship banker is or your business banker is, get to know them and have a sit down, even if it's just an hour. You then want to understand, firstly, what credit you can access at that point in time, what you need to do to access more credit. And they'll readily sort of help you, because you then want to understand what milestones your business needs to hit so that it can have proper access to capital. Because you will have customers that are difficult in terms of payment. You will have projects that you want to execute, opportunities that come that need capital to deploy. You want to start, get an MVP going, show that there's traction so that more investors can come in, and you need capital to do that, right? Sit with your banker so that you can understand from your banker's perspective, what are they looking at and what do they look for in your business so that they can give you more credit. And stack it up. Don't abuse it, don't use it per se if you don't really need it, so that when those opportunities come, you have access to this cash, so you can take advantage and also survive dry seasons. You might have a period now, as I said, it's probably a quiet period unless you're in entertainment or retail coming up. How are you covering that? Do you have subscription revenue? Probably not. How are you going to still manage payroll? Because people still need to be paid. Rent needs to be paid. And this is the kind of thing you want to be having. And linked, and I speak to adequate here, is you need to get relevant cover for your business. Right? If you have employees, as a basic, have your quotas. If you're in like your construction, consulting, think about your professional indemnities, right? Things do go wrong. How do you shield your business from that? If you're doing like trade, large, big trade deals, think about trade insurance. If someone runs away with your money, if you're conned, if certain technicalities happen, you might have bought something at point X, by the time it arrives, due to what we've had supply chain issues where ports are not working. How do you ensure that consignment so that it's not a huge knock on your business itself, right? So relevant to where you're operating, just understand what risks you're exposed to and build in those buffers. But I think in this is really, really learn to build it when you don't need it. Because when you do, I can assure you, there's very few people willing to step up. But I think we've also, and I say this not to be doom and gloom, but we are also sort of seeing a shift in the ecosystem. There are players, development finance institutions that are becoming available. I mean, check us out on like MyDough, the ecosystem, that are willing to fund, but you then need to be aware of these. But they also then still need to work with something, right? Do you have a good record of your financials? How are you going to navigate that sort of space? And the last one here is really, before you spend, really do understand what value it's adding to your business. I know it might sound like a very obvious thing to say, but I think you look at some of our expenses, we sometimes are afraid to spend in areas that are going to grow the business. Where, for example, I want to get an assistant next year. That unlocks value for me. Means, if I'm valued at, 1,500 Rand an hour, and I'm still doing like minutes or, chasing minute meetings, or I'm doing this, if I can unlock that capacity to do, I guess, more of this work or strategic engagements or client engagements, I can up that rate per hour because, then I can start to unlock projects that are worth more for my time. I recently got a laptop, invested in, it's actually the Boomba Tech guys that here on the call, but software license that equips me on from a cybersecurity risk perspective, but also professionalism in that space. Those I see as investments, right? Like, I'm not worried now that my laptop would be buffering as I'm speaking to you, and these are things that add value, adds efficiency. Recently, come into an office space because I wanted to be able to work without disruptions and engage. And it's added probably another 3 hours of probably deep work per day. And from an efficiency point of view, the value is there. I'm paying 3,500 a month. Those hours I gain daily are huge in terms of my output and the capacity to earn. But then there are certain expenses I think we onboard too soon without a clear business case. How is it going to grow this business? And don't be afraid to kind of perpetually kind of audit and say, do I need this going into the new year? Can I restructure this? I myself, I'm canceling a few subscriptions in December to move to either cheaper ones or cancel that space altogether because I found an alternative. So linked again to return on expenses, right? As the business owner, and probably speaking to a lot of business owners or senior managers here, is growth is really linked to ability to delegate effectively the lower order activities, right? In the early days of your business, as mentioned, you're heavily involved. You're doing deliveries, you're doing technical support, and at some point you need to be able to delegate effectively, bring on people on board that have complementary skills to you that can take over this and add more value to your business. Because as you grow, you don't want to hinder. I spoke about it like 1,500 Rand an hour. If you're doing those tasks, then someone could be doing it for 600 Rand an hour. You're hurting the business, right? And if you're doing those tasks, that hour could be best used in unlocking more revenue that can get you maybe 50,000 Rand for an hour, And I think you need to look at it in that way. Like, for example, let's just say MyDough was paying me for this workshop, which they're not, by the way. But like, if it was a workshop that paid, let's say, 10,000 Rand an hour, but typically coaching is like 1,000, I need to be able to unlock this time to be able to do this. But if I can't, and I'm stuck in daily reporting, the like, again, I'm hurting the business, right? And this delegation is not necessarily just delegating to people. Might be a controversial view, but you want to really be slow to hire because having the right team, there are tools now available. There's, apps, there's, platforms, that you can invest in. Ensure that you're able to learn so that they can unlock efficiencies for you. The minute taker as an example. I've automated the booking of my meetings because I don't have the back and forth. I understand the guys are busy. They can reschedule on their side. All I know is I prep each day the meetings that are in my calendar. And also from a sales perspective, there's just this less of annoying engagements you have where, oh, what time are you available? Can we do this? And you're not now discussing, how do we help you? How can we unlock revenue? You know, there's a engagement fatigue, you know, before you get to the core of some of the stuff. So I think for me, really, the agility here speaks to be able to move through and delegate effect, be slow to hire, but delegate where you're giving clear work packages also when you hire people, where they can take over things that have clear KPIs that you can monitor, and you're hopping in to support when they get stuck. From a digital business point of view, I mean, this really is all about creating conversations with potential customers. And you want to reach a lot more of the customers that fit your target niche, or as they like to call it, avatar or ideal customer profile. You want to reach them as far as possible. I like to think of it this way, is that there's someone out there that needs your product or service as in right now, and you want to be able to meet them. Because I think often what we do is you're relying on the customers that you're meeting within the immediate network, and you want to make that work, right? And that can be hard work. If I, as a customer, I'm not necessarily ready, I like what you do. I might be ready for consuming it in 6 months. But if I'm, you know, you as a client, you might turn me off if it's too aggressive because you need me to buy now, but I'll only be ready in 6 months. You then want to move to people that, I always have a rule of thumb, like 1 in every 10 should be easy. And if not even 1 in 10 of the customers you engage are easy, then you then need to look at your value proposition, look at your offering completely and say, is this really relevant in the market? But you then want to reach out to that one that when you get in the room, they're like, this is what I've been waiting for, right? And the way to do that from a digital point of view, from a reach perspective, amplifying even your attendance at events or this, you can then reach, I mean, your social media platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram have allowed us to reach people that are not in our network. And globally, so to speak, you're not then limited to your country, your continent, right? You can have conversations with people broadly across the globe. So you want to build your business such that it reaches the people that need it immediately. That's always my take. And that also gives you a bit of confidence, right? It gives you the confidence to actually go and make the next sales call. Gives you the confidence to wake up the next day and attack the next sort of engagement or opportunity to network. And I'm almost there. From a resilient team culture perspective, I think I chose this image because it gives an indication that we all bring something different, right? Unique. You don't want to look at diversity for diversity's sake, but what is tying the people that are in your business together? And that is a clear focus on what you do and what you stand for as a business. I think as MyDough and being a part of the space, I'll give an example of that is the key thing is baking procurement ready businesses, right? The commitment is on supporting SMMEs to be ready to engage with corporates, but also support other SMMEs. The way we look at it, even as a breakdown of a science, is how do we get that top 20% of SMMEs being able to comfortably work with corporates? And how do we get the 60 to 70% to be able to then support those ones that are working with corporates, unlocking revenue in the ecosystem? Because for some people, getting 20 million project is game changing. For some, getting 5,000 a month or 2,000 a month is game changing from a revenue perspective. And then there's also understanding that there's some that just won't be dialed in. There's a 10% or 20%. And it's understanding in your team culture that that is also okay, right? So that you prioritize the ones that you are hitting to be ready. in that space. And then acknowledging and seeing people for the value they can bring into the team. Oh, that is insane. Rewarding the right behaviors and immediately addressing the slack, right? If you can create an environment like that where, you know, you are not punishing your top performers. Because if I'm a, top performer, I'm trying to hit my goals, I keep having to go back because someone else didn't do their job. It's only going to take a matter of time before I move on to new opportunities, right? But the business then loses out. So you want to cultivate a culture, one that acknowledges talent. It's very clear about how that talent contributes to the bigger goal, and is also able to address issues as soon as they happen, comfortable to address and have those difficult conversations. And then on the other side, reward the top performance. The customer centric will be a quick one because I just want to give an example of, a business I've just recently ported to Million Mobile. And coming from the landscape of, they've just capitalized on poor customer service in the telco space. They give you tailored packages. And by the way, they're not sponsoring this, but it's a tailored package. But what really gets me even more is that to onboard myself, do the porting, I just need someone to support and ask me questions, which they're readily available to. But I don't need to go to a branch. I'm equipped with steps. I was able to do this within a day. And that for me is incredibly appealing. When I then need to upgrade or downgrade, they've also got SMME solutions in the space. Is when I grow or expand, they've built the platform such that it grows with me. If I'm looking at eSIMs, this, or adding unpacked packages for my team, it's that kind of centricity or understanding that you need in your business, where you may be in a market that you might feel is packed, but if you understand what your customers are crying for, what they need, you can then tailor it, right? They don't have WhatsApp chatbots. There's a human chatting to me on the other side of that WhatsApp, which makes it so efficient because I ask the question, I get answered, and then they'll have a few millions to say, are you happy? But that's the key when you're looking at customer centricity. Is the market that you're in, you might say, oh, it's saturated, it's this, but look at opportunities. Some might be validly saturated or being cannibalized by new opportunities. I use digital marketing versus, traditional print media. Digital has definitely taken a big share of the pie. So then you need to say, how do I adapt in that space? And then lastly, this one is really I need to also open up questions. There's something I learned is went to a church 3 weeks ago. And I was so impressed with the guy giving the financial report. And I thought, yes, this is like a really financially viable church, right? The way it runs and the way they're able to break down and explain how the different members can contribute towards the growth of the church. And what's important here is if you're trying to build a business, I'm looking at sales target for 2025. This is probably the time to sort of chart them. You then really need to have a clear understanding of what contributes to your sales target, and where you're going to focus in terms of growing and getting that right. I think I would encourage you that if every year you're starting at zero, there's a challenge, but it's how do you then start to identify where your core business is and focus on building that. So the guy started with something that I know it happens, but like emphasizing that a key 70% of their budget comes from dedicated giving, which is monthly contributions. And only 25%, I think, of the church are consistent givers, giving at X amount. I think it was 400 or something. And the plea was, can we increase the base of people that contribute towards this? They'll easily hit their targets. Right? You then look at Sunday collections, that another key factor, 15%, communion, and then other, which is events, birthdays. And then I find from SMMEs, going into year on year, we should really be focusing on the red, which is your foundation, right? How do I lock those in? How do I make sure my core customers commit to next year? How can I make sure that I'm forecasting or improving? Maybe I can take that 70%, improve some of the revenue, get more out of my existing customer base. I think we don't spend enough time there because that's the engine of your business that gives you long-term sustainability. And we might give the same attention, time, and effort to things that are the shiny that come in that are not adding the same level of value. Right? If you think about a consulting business at its core, now give MyDough as an example. Consulting business is the ESG aspect, right? That's the core. That's what corporates are paying for. And then we launch a product, right? Platform, can be subscription based. We can't throw everything at that product at the expense of the core, right? We'll soon find ourselves out of business. We need to make sure we're keeping our customers happy because that product only gets to see light of day because of revenue from the core business. So I think in closing, it's really for me saying, find what your business model is, like really crystallize it, understand what sustains you, grow from there, and never forget that that is what is keeping you alive. That's it for me. Open to questions. I know we started 5 minutes late, so I think we have about 15 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Bernard. We can now take questions. If you have any question and you're afraid to speak up, you can just type it in the chat or you can just unmute your mic there and we take it from there. Okay, so I will take it as if everything was clear with Bernard's presentation. And okay, there goes Andile. Andile, please unmute your mic.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bernard, for a wonderful presentation. Bernard, I wanted to actually ask, with tech taking its role and with us businesses slowly actually adapting to actually using these platforms, and what would you say maybe from a manufacturer's point of view, apart from e-commerce, seeing that e-commerce is a major tech platform to actually get into the tech space, how or what other maybe tech strategies you would have to actually capitalize on just tech as a business, just apart from e-commerce, which is a commonly known tech platform, but maybe what other tech maybe strategies or just platforms to maybe consider or think about or look into?
Okay, no, thanks, Andile. I think I'll speak directly to you because I know your business, right? So I would say from a manufacturing space, invest in equipment that can help you track, the data, right? So in the mixing of your, the yogurts, the likes, you want to be able to track what is going into each formulation. So that one, you can automate that at some point, but you also have better control on consistency in terms of output, right? Quality control checks, it makes it easier for you to pass your regulatory checks, which means you stick around a lot longer. So I think for me, it's really investing in, if you ever get to invest in a manufacturing facility, it's having ones that have sensors to check that. It unlocks your scale. It lessens the need for you to be doing quality checks at each part of the process. Then you can leverage that data to kind of then say, if I make a slight tweak here, can I have savings in terms of input material? without compromising the taste overall. Hope that helps.
Yes, thank you, sir.
We have Sian. You can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you very much, Bennett. Thank you for the wonderful deliberation and the insightful presentation that you just gave now. My question is, I'm not sure whether it's going to be a question or a statement, but let me just actually start from here to say that I hope the 3 weeks you were at church was not the last time for the year. And now looking at what you're talking about when you refer to customer-centric approach that we ought to take as a stand, and of course, giving into cognition the fact that there's quite a lot of factors that plays a role in the success of business within the broader perspective of South African economy. I'm looking at the fact that, especially when you're talking about compliance risk and regulatory risk and all that, do we have to have a policy of sort just to safeguard the interest of the business in line with where things are going in terms of the digital space? Do we really need to have a policy of some sort in case somebody just uses, your image and eventually or consequentially damage, the corporate image of the business, seeing that, the business is actually heading that way?
I think definitely we need to have those policies, even basic sort of public access to information. And I hope thing is still here. There's Bongani from Boomba Tech. You can engage on that tech side. Protection of, even internal information, setting up folders, setting up access. That'll be a big aspect leading into the space, because your clients will be looking at that, right? Because they don't want, particularly corporates, they want to be assured. They'd want to see that you have a public access to information, act aligned policy. How do you manage your information? How do you ensure that client information is secure? Because if they're working with you, you expose a significant risk to them if you don't have those things in place. So I would say we definitely need to invest in that.
Yeah, and my last question would be on seeing that you spoke a lot about the church. I like what you just did there in terms of the breakdown of where giving was going. What else can be done in terms of transforming and enabling the church to become agile in terms of digital governance and digital performance? That was my last question.
I think one of the biggest things is being more available. So I think, I spoke about, from a digital point of view, being accessible, as opposed to not just being in person, right? Showcasing what the church does, sharing in initiatives that are, that same church was having like a GBV, fundraising walk, right? Where there'll be t-shirts and this. You then need to be able to, yes, that work is happening, but how do you make people aware of it if you're not on a digital platform? Have you built mechanisms to collect money online, to donate, for people to donate? I know you probably won't have like the SARS public benefit stuff there, but there isn't a tax rebate for people contributing. But you then want to be able to showcase the good work that the church is doing in its environment. I would also implore them to also be doing good work in the environment so that people can know about them and people would want to give money, because people give money where they see value.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And I just wanted to give the last person a chance to ask a question if there's anyone else. Okay. With that being said, thank you very much again, Bernard, for this. We really appreciate it. And for tomorrow's workshop, we have Simon Nika, who will be tackling preparing your business for a compliant 2025. Simon is a senior associate attorney at KHR. He is an admitted attorney for the High Court. So with that being said, let's gear up for tomorrow's workshop and be ready. Thank you everyone else for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, bye.